Let's talk about optimizing conversion on a low traffic website. Hey, this is Justin Hitt from Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. Just waiting here for the kid who's at a dental appointment, and I figured I'd do a little presentation. So I've been thinking about this all morning. If you have a low traffic website that's under 500 unique visitors a day, how do you optimize traffic to understand what generates more leads and sales so you can do more of it? So what are the things that you test? How do you conduct the test? And then ultimately what you're looking for. So a big problem with a low traffic website is that to have a statistically accurate test, meaning a test that you can rely on, that's easily repeatable, that has a high probability of being repeatable, you need a lot of traffic. So if you have 5 tests, you could need 200,000 unique visitors or impressions on the site for the test. And if you don't have that because you have less than 500 unique visitors a day, and by the way, if you don't know how to figure that out, I can show you with your analytics software how to figure out how many unique visitors you have a day. But the best measure is if you're not getting 2 or 3 conversions a day, if you're not generating 2 or 3 leads a day, something's wrong, and we have to figure out what's wrong and what's right. Now, I'm going to focus on what's right, and we're going to do more of that. And then whatever's wrong, we're going to stop doing that, and we're going to change those things to test new concepts. So the first thing you want to do is test headlines. So if you're using a WordPress blog or you're using a Shopify site, there's a number of tools that you can use to test the headlines themselves. Now, the problem with these tools is that they are very expensive. So if your website's getting 50 unique visitors a day and it's only generating $100 to maybe $200 in revenue a day, and you've got a tool that costs you $300, $400 a month, then it's not going to be as productive. Now, my larger clients with publishing sites that have 20, 30,000 unique visitors a day. Now, these aren't impressions. These are unique humans, because in a direct response world, you only measure the human behavior, not the impressions, because that could be bots or other things. But if you have a large amount of traffic, you can test faster, but you can also afford to monetize, because if each unique visitor brings you $1, then you're able to monetize a tool that is going to cost you $300, $400, $500 a month. So what are some low-cost ways to test headlines? Well, there's a number of free plugins that you can use in WordPress, and then there's also tools like VWO or Optimizely that they'll have some kind of free level. And if you're going to use the free level of one of these tools, it's all about making sure you get the basics down. You want to test your minimum viable offer, which is usually a paid consultation. It's usually that initial product or initial appointment to just get something tested. But your headlines are the first thing you're going to test. And if you don't have these tools, you can use my topic testing methods approach that will allow you to take your Google Analytics and determine which headlines or which content is producing the results that we're looking for. But the key is you're testing the headlines. Now, what are you testing the headlines for? Well, a lot of folks will say for engagement, for time on page. I think all that's BS. I think the only thing you want to test is the number of leads and the number of sales. Now, you can measure visitors from outside traffic. So if you've posted a bunch of links on social media and you want to see which of those posts or social media channels are best, then you can measure the number of actions taken from the social media platform to your platform. However, we don't care about engagement. We don't care about likes. We don't care about subscribers on platforms. None of that matters, because if you can get a behavior, which is a visitor coming from one platform to another, or a visitor landing on your site and becoming a lead, or a visitor on your site purchasing a product or service, that tells you more about the behavioral interests of that prospect. So I wrote a report a little while back on headline formulas, and you literally can write 100 headlines and then start narrow them down with your group, narrow them down based on past information, and then just test 2 headlines. Because if you test 3 or you test 30, the variations are going to require a massive amount of volume. And even if you've got 1 million impressions a day, you really don't you don't want to waste them on tests that don't produce some kind of result. So you want to focus your impressions on testing what generates revenue and what generates leads. Now, the reason leads are so valuable is because then you can invite those leads back. You're actually creating your own medium. So those leads could be opt-ins or subscriptions or something that at least gets you contact information from your prospect. Could be a request for additional information. In addition to testing headlines, you want to test your template layouts. Now, a lot of you folks have some very pretty websites, and that's okay if you're just trying to be pretty. But I want my clients to be profitable. So very often we'll strip everything out of the website except for the basics. That's the feature image. That's images inside of content. That's the layout of your pages so that it's easy to follow, simple to use. It's your mobile layout versus your desktop layout. As we have more and more mobile users, you want to make sure that your layout is clear, that the visitor can see the content. I also like to optimize for readers. Okay. Now, what do I mean by readers? Well, people who are visually impaired, individuals that have mobile devices that they get your what's called an RSS feed. And if any of these terms are unfamiliar with you, please schedule an appointment or ask your questions so we can talk about this in detail. Because this is the magic sauce that lets you know that your copy's working and that lets you know that your website is reaching a specific audience. But the readers means I want my content, if someone scraped my content, to still point back to my site. So I'm going to hard code all my images to come from my site. I'm going to hard code internal cross references that are in text. So sometimes you'll see on a news site, it'll have a news story and then it'll say in all caps, :related, and then it'll have like a related story. And so that's setting up context for the search engines that this story is related to that story. And then it's also, if that content gets scraped, meaning someone has pulled the content off the website and they're putting it on their own website, it's still going to link back to content deeper in the site. So that's your internal contextual links. There's testing that can be done on the headline, the feature image, the excerpt, and the key things that would show up in the index. That index is usually the same as it's going to be on the syndication of your RSS feeds. There's some optimization that we do as well that for those RSS feeds or those sitemaps is to order them by creation date or change date. That way, when new content is created, it goes or modified, it goes to the top of the list of your RSS feeds. So if somebody pulls the top 5 headlines, they're going to get the top 5 articles that most recently changed. Now, again, why is that important? Because we want to drive traffic to our most recent, most informed creations of content. So as you learn things about your headlines, and this is site specific, as you learn things about what type of excerpts work, you're going to document those in best practices. So, for example, if headlines that prompt a question, like shocking discovery, is creating the question in the reader's mind, what was the shocking discovery? So, shocking discovery in basement floors community. That's, well, what did they find in the basement? That's creating a question. There could be a headline that has a benefit, 27 ways to lose weight. And I'm giving you just generic headlines, but you might say, oh, wow, look at our lead generation. People are opting in when they are landing first on content that has to do with, tips or listicles or other things that are specific types of content. And then you just create more of those and it will work in that audience. Now, depending on how your site's set up, your opt-in form might be, I know a lot of our newsletter sites, they have a opt-in widget on the side that rotates. And then we have one at the bottom of the article that rotates unless the article is specific to a campaign. Well, the A/B split on that call to action can also be tested. Now, here's where it gets a little challenging. So one of the things that we do is the technical integration between the components of your marketing automation. What does that mean in simple terms? We make all the tools that you're paying for work. Because if you're paying a bunch of money for all these tools that don't work, like a CRM system, an email marketing campaign, and your content management system, if those don't talk to each other, and if the analytics your web tracking doesn't work between all those, then lead attribution and sales attribution will be very difficult. So for example, you might be using Shopify for your e-commerce, but you may have a number of content sites that drive to Shopify. You want to know across all those content sites what content's creating customers or driving sales. We want to know their first connect and we want to know their last connect. So these are important things that we can do. All that tracking requires some technical expertise. So if it's something of challenge to you and you have the traffic, then we can sit down and go through and start building out this best practices. But you want to know from the headlines what types of headlines work, and you want to 80% of what you do is what you know works. 20% is just you can spaghetti on the wall. It's okay, because we want to test new concepts because your audience will change over time. It's the excerpt for the page, and that excerpt also derives metadata and influences your social media content. So the little meta excerpt that you have in your blog post and the excerpt you have in the WordPress platform, and I'm just using WordPress as an example. You could be on Movable Type, you could be on all kinds of platforms, but those little 25-word blurbs or 160 character blurbs can also be tested in social media as well. So can you effectively take the test, what you learned from the social media test, and combine it with what you learned from the website tests in order to have a good idea of what drives traffic to the website. And then once they're on the website, what drives leads. And you're going to build the categorization that way. You're going to have best practices to drive traffic, best practices to generate leads, best practices to generate sales. And then afterwards, we're going to audit all that stuff to determine best practices to generate sales. And then we tend to work from the sale forward. So if you're selling a high ticket service, if you're selling a consulting, if you're selling copywriting services or marketing services, your ability to know what makes sales and what doesn't helps you get the most from your marketing dollars. It helps you focus your outputs to generate the maximum inputs. So you're able to make maximum sales with minimum money and minimum time, because that best practice document is something you can brief your team on. If you bring a new person on board and you can say, hey, look, and I know Agora has one of these best practices guides, and they're going to say, hey, look, financial offers work best if we have fear of missing out. And I don't know that that's the case today, but I've heard from conferences and events, they've described their best practices. And you have to ask, how do they know what their best practices are? And the answer is that they test. And I'm sharing with you how to get started with the testing. Now, there are a number of plugins and modules and testing tools and platforms. If you're not technically inclined, you will want to work with a campaign manager who can set these things up for you, and a webmaster who can keep those things up and running. Those are services that we offer. We offer it to a small number of private clients because it is a labor-intensive activity. However, if you're paying $300 a month for a tool, you want to make sure you get maximum quality out of it. If you're using analytics tools and you're running campaigns and you're paying for advertising, let's say you have a $5,000 or $10,000 a month advertising budget, you want to make sure every dollar counts. If you're writing copy, you want to make sure that your copy is being tested in a statistically accurate way. The last thing you want is a customer to stop running a lead generation piece or stop running a sales piece because it doesn't feel like it's working anymore. Like, how do you know? Can you show me the numbers? And see, that's what accountable direct response advertising is about. It's about being able to see the numbers. Now, if you can't afford these tools, if you've got a low traffic website, if you're working with a client who's not yet sold on the concept of actually measuring, then you can start with leads and sales. Now, in the program, I talked about how advertising agencies very often mislead and rip off their customers. They're talking about impressions and engagement and time on site. None of that matters. If someone drops on my site, spends 2 seconds and buys a product, they are a good enough customer for me, okay? I'm going to focus my efforts. I'm going to focus on getting more of the same because I didn't take a lot to sell them. But now somebody who comes to the site 5 or 10, 15 times, spends hours on the site, and then buys a product, well, that's another category. That's another segment of customer that I want to be aware of. But that time on the site is not as valuable. There's a lot of things that can break when it comes to analytics. So we want to be focusing on 5 or 10 tests. We want to have our methodology an approach that we use consistently. We want to have consistent UTM tracking codes. That's the universal tracking a tag that you can put on your URL so that when someone comes from an external site, you can know the source, median, and campaign. You want to be consistent about putting those in place. If you're tagging your RSS feeds, you want to be consistent about that. Now, when we manage WordPress websites, we have specific tools and plugins that we use that simplify that and that keep that thing working consistently, because these things will break all the time. And the problem with analytics is that if a test breaks, you don't really know it's broken. You have to have dashboards and you have to have ways of checking on that. And if you're not technically inclined, if you're not interested in testing that, if you're a creative type and you just want to start making more content, then you need somebody to go in there and keep the tests running, and then to analyze the best practices and write those best practices down. Maybe discuss them with your team, flesh them out into procedurals or guidelines, so that your editorial guideline for your website is creating engaging content that generates leads and sales. See, if you just create engaging content, you could just talk about the latest Trump adventure or the latest Biden falling down the steps, and a lot of news sites do that. But if they want to get subscribers, if they want to have product sales, if they want to leverage events and conferences, then they've got to have the leads. They've got to have the sales of any size. Attribute it to where those people come from, so that you can then focus your very limited marketing dollars on where to get more customers. Okay, that's what we do here. We help you create and keep profitable customers. So if you don't know where the customers come from, and it wouldn't matter if you knew which customers were profitable, because you wouldn't be able to trace back the cause and effect elements. Now, if you know which customers are profitable, we can build systems to track the cause and effect, and now you can get more of them. That's the way the math works. And as Dan Kennedy says, direct response is math and psychology. And those are the two areas that we focus in. Now, again, it's in bloody detail that sometimes is beyond what most people want. But again, that's my specialty, the science of advertising, and ultimately being able to track and attribute where my leads and sales come from, and then ultimately get more of them. And what makes this powerful is that as you do the analysis, whether it's my topic testing method, whether you're paying for one of these really nice tools, whether you're mining data with a search engine keyword tool, we can test this stuff, and then we can know what works, and we can do more of what works. My philosophy is that we build into our process and we build into our guidelines what works, so that it's just a natural element, so that your editors, your copywriters, the people who are creating content for you, or they're creating the ads for you, don't need to know the technical details. They can just know this is a control, and then you've tested the control, so you know it has a high repeatability. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. You can ask your questions at www.adbriefings.co.uk, where we have insights and tools about the business of copywriting, how to increase your client count, other products and services you can offer, as well as tools and tricks to write better copy. I want to thank you for being a part of what we do here today. Please ask your questions at www.adbriefings.co.uk, because this content does syndicate to a large number of resources, and I want to make sure that I'm able to answer your questions in a timely manner. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.